I watched an auctioneer try 3 times to sell my mother's house, and nobody would bid. The man who forced that sale stood 6 feet away from me, and he would not bid on it either. That house was worth $312,000 and carried no debt except one, and the one it carried belonged to a man my mother never met. My name is Corinne. My mother was Alma, and the man who would not bid had bought a judgment against her from a bank that had already written it off. In 2016, I paid off my mother's mortgage. She was 4 months from a foreclosure sale. I had $128,000 my father left me, and I wired every dollar of it to her lender. There was no new mortgage after that, and I put my name on nothing. The lender recorded a release, the house stood clear, and I thought that was the end of it. That payment is the exact reason my mother's house was sold out from under me, and every lawyer I asked told me so in the same careful voice. In 2007, my mother signed a lease guarantee for her brother's print shop. That shop closed 3 years later, and in 2011, the landlord took a judgment against her for $340,000. A judgment like that becomes a lien on everything you own in the county the day it goes on the record. It sat on the house from 2011 forward, standing behind a mortgage from 1998 she was never going to finish paying. That is the part everybody understands and nobody explains. A lien takes nothing from you. It stands in a line, and all that has ever mattered is who is standing in front of it. So here's the question I could not answer for 3 years. If the man holding that judgment had a house worth $312,000 in front of him and no mortgage left in his way, why would he not bid on it even once? He had lawyers. He had waited 12 years. He had driven 2 hours to be in that room, and when the auctioneer asked him, he shook his head and said nothing. The first lawyer I took it to was kind about it, and he was also completely right, which took me years to be able to say. He told me that when you pay somebody else's mortgage, the law calls you a volunteer. A volunteer gets a thank you, and a volunteer does not get a lien. He told me a released mortgage is dead paper, and that you do not get to unrecord a thing because you have changed your mind about it. He told me my mother owed $340,000 and the house was worth $312,000, so there was nothing underneath it left for me to inherit even if I won. Every one of those sentences was a correct statement of the rule he was taught, and 2 more lawyers said the same 3 things in a different order. So I stopped asking. I took a rented room above a laundromat for $940 a month, and I kept the deed my mother signed me, because it was the last thing with her handwriting on it. She signed that deed on the 3rd of March 2014, 2 years before I paid anybody anything. I never carried it to the courthouse, because recording it cost money we did not have. An unrecorded deed is not a fake deed. It is good between the 2 people who signed it, and all that recording ever does is warn the rest of the world it happened. In 2020, the man holding that judgment renewed it, on time, exactly the way the statute says you have to. My mother died in 2022, and 7 months later he moved to sell her house. Here is what none of us knew. The mortgage I paid off in 2016 did not die when it was released, because the law can put it back, in my hands, in the exact place it was standing, and the judgment that thought it had moved to the front had never moved at all. That is why nobody would bid. Anybody buying that house was buying it with $128,000 of somebody else's mortgage sitting in front of them, and every professional in that room could see it except me. The rule has a name that sounds like nothing. The lawyers call it equitable subrogation, and all it means is that when your money pays somebody's debt, the law can stand you in that creditor's place. Think about what the alternative would be. That mortgage swallowed the whole $128,000 and went down to 0, and the only man on earth who got richer for it never lifted a finger. That kind of gain. It calls it a windfall, and equity will not let a creditor keep one that came out of somebody else's pocket by accident. So the released mortgage gets treated as alive, for this one purpose, and only for the $128,000 that actually paid it. It does not grow. It just stands where it was standing. There is exactly one thing that can defeat it. If standing me in that lender's place would leave the man with the judgment worse off than he was before I paid, it does not happen. And he was not worse off by any measure. He took his lien behind that mortgage in 2011, he renewed it behind that mortgage in 2020, and putting it back in front of him handed him the position he had held every day of those 12 years. Which brings you to the only thing that was ever really in dispute in my mother's case, and it is not a legal term. It is the plain English word the first lawyer used on me. A volunteer is somebody who pays a debt that was never any of their business. If that is what I was, none of this reaches me, and the judgment really did move to the front. I was not a volunteer. I owned that house on the morning I paid. The proof had been in a folder in a rented room the whole time, and it took a stranger in a courthouse to make me look at it. Somebody who pays to protect their own property is not a volunteer in any state in this country. That is not a soft rule, it is the oldest part of the whole doctrine. The deed my mother signed in 2014 made me the owner 2 years before that wire ever went out. I was not being generous to her, I was stopping a foreclosure sale of a house that was already mine. Not recording it never made it less mine. All it meant was that a buyer who knew nothing about me could have beaten me to the counter, and there was never going to be a buyer. But knowing a thing and proving it are two different jobs, and a folder with your mother's handwriting in it proves nothing at all on its own. A deed can be written the week before a hearing and dated any day you like. Every judge in this country has seen that trick, and I would have deserved every question about mine. What I needed was somebody with no reason on earth to help me, on the record, under oath, saying that I held that deed years before any of this ever started. I want to tell you now, before I tell you how, that I did not go and find that document. It was handed to me, in a sealed envelope, by the man taking the house. He is careful. That is the entire story of the man, and it is the only reason I am not still living above that laundromat. To sell a house out from under a judgment, you have to name every person who might claim an interest in it. Leave one of them out, and your own sale can be attacked years later by whoever you skipped. So, a careful man skips nobody. A careful man pays a title company to find every soul alive with a claim on that ground, then names all of them in his complaint and swears to it. His searcher found me. Not the deed, which sat in my folder, but a homeowner's policy I'd put in my own name in 2015, and a property tax exemption form I signed at the county in 2016. And in the complaint that started the sale of my mother's house down in paragraph 9, he went ahead and described me himself. He called me a person in possession claiming an interest under an unrecorded deed dated the 3rd of March 2014. He wrote that to protect his own sale, and he put a date in it that nobody else could have given me. I did not understand what I was holding. I read that paragraph the way you read anything a lawyer sends you, which is to say as bad news, and then it went into a kitchen drawer. The sale was set for a Thursday in the spring. I went because I could not think of a reason to stay home, and because I wanted to see who was going to buy it. He read the same paragraph out every time, in the flat voice of a man who has read it 10,000 times, and I heard it 3 times that year without ever once hearing it. He said that the property was being sold subject to all prior liens of record, including any lien revived by operation of law. Nobody bid. He waited, he asked for a bid twice, then he continued the sale to a date in the summer, and everybody stood up and went to lunch. In the summer, nobody bid. In the fall, nobody bid, and by the fall I had stopped going, and a clerk telephoned to tell me because she felt sorry for me. On the 3rd one I went back, and I waited until that room had emptied out, and I asked the auctioneer why nobody on earth would buy a house worth $312,000. He was not allowed to advise me, and he did not advise me. He tapped the sheet in his hand twice, told me he only ever reads what the file tells him to read, and packed up his box. So I wrote down the only 5 words on that sheet I did not understand. Revived by operation of law. The public library downtown keeps a legal collection on the 2nd floor that almost nobody uses. It took me 2 evenings to find that phrase and a 3rd evening to believe it. The second thing I went looking for was that word volunteer, and that is where I found out the question was never whether I had been generous to my mother. It was whether I owned anything on the morning I sent that wire, and I had already been told that I did own it in writing, under oath, by the one person whose word a court was never going to doubt on that point. I took that complaint back out of the drawer. I read paragraph 9 for the first time as a sentence a man had sworn to, instead of as a threat a man had mailed me. He had gone to the trouble and the expense of proving that I was holding a deed to that house in 2014, because if he had not proved it, some buyer years later might have undone his sale. There was never going to be a buyer. He knew it, because he had known about the mortgage I paid off since the day his own title search came back to him, and that is why he sat in that room 3 times and would not raise his hand. He was not waiting on a bidder at all. He was waiting for me to give up and sign something cheap, and for 14 months that was very nearly going to work. I filed my answer in that same case, because I was already a defendant in it. He had made me one himself, down in paragraph 9, out of pure carefulness. The court put that 1998 mortgage back into my hands for $128,000, standing in front of a judgment for $340,000, on a house worth $312,000. There was nothing left underneath it for him. He did not lose that house because he was greedy, and he did not lose it because he broke a rule. He lost it because he followed every last one of them, in order, on time, and in writing. The man who took my mother's house spent 12 years being careful, and the only thing all that care ever built was the proof that the house had been mine the whole time.